Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. Happy Monday. This is Canada's most irreverent talk show on True North, the Andrew Lawton Show, on this Monday, March 11th, 2024. I just realized that my weird space-age charging contraption is visible. It's not. It looked like some weird little. I don't actually know what it looked. Just looked weird, and I didn't even know what it was, and it's on my desk. But anyway, all that notwithstanding, it keeps my devices charged, which is I'm very grateful for, because I got tired of having one charger for this thing and one charger for that one. It's little nifty desktop. I should just I should actually go to the company and be like, I was about to plug you on my show, but I didn't. Send us a sponsorship check and then I will. But anyway, lots of fun. Hope you had a good weekend. I was going to lay low for a bit, and then I realized on Sunday, just a little bit down the road from me, a couple hours down the road, Pierre Poilievre was holding a rally at the Toronto Congress Centre in Etobicoke. And I don't normally, rallies are not generally sources for news, because it's not a press conference, it's the stump speech. Even yesterday, I heard Pierre Poilievre tell a lot of the same stories and jokes that I've already heard before. And then what was happening, though, is they decided to bill it as a massive rally. Now, that is a lofty, ambitious adjective to put in front of an event. It could end up being massive, but they were promoting it as a massive rally. So I was like, all right, well, if it's going to be massive, maybe I should go. And certainly the police presence was massive. I have covered for the last, 14 years in this country, a number of political events, liberal, conservatives, events at which the Prime Minister, whether it was Stephen Harper or Justin Trudeau, has been there. And I have never seen at a political event that wasn't a state summit of some kind, having the number of police officers on site as were at Poilievre's rally yesterday. It's a giant Congress Centre, convention center in Toronto. But you go in and there are just tons of police cars in the parking lot, police officers inside. There were some very non-convincing undercover police officers walking around in the crowd, pretending to be spectators, but you could just tell. And then you also had the mounted unit. So the Toronto Police Service horseback unit, which were the ones in Ottawa for the Freedom Convoy, they were out walking around. And ultimately, the massive protest they must have been expecting didn't materialize. There was one lone Greenpeace protester inside that unfurled a banner and was promptly arrested and removed by police from the venue. But apart from that, I get why they're doing it. We've seen massive anti-Israel protests against Justin Trudeau, against members of parliament, against Jewish community centers and schools. So it stands to reason that they probably would have shown up or could have shown up at this rally. Maybe there were a few outside, but it didn't end up that it was all that necessary. But all that notwithstanding, I was wrong about my expectation, because there was a little bit of news in this rally. He deviated from the standard stump speech, in which he whipped out greatest hits such as how it would warm his heart to see a family move into the former CBC headquarters as their new home, and talking about when Anna Poilievre, Pierre's wife, used her hair elastic to fix up their car when they were on a road trip. I've heard all those stories before. Not everyone there might have, but then he said something new. Take a look at this.
In fact, that's why I'm making an announcement today. It is now 21 days, 9 hours, 28 minutes, and 53 seconds until Trudeau's April Fool's Day tax hike kicks in on you. So here's my announcement. Common sense conservatives are unleashing a massive pressure campaign on NDP and Liberal MPs to vote against Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh and in favor of spiking the hike and axing the tax. But it involves all of you. I can't do it myself. Politics is not a spectator sport. It is a participation sport. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you need to be at the table. So I'm going to be asking some things from all of you. I'm going to be asking, we are going to start a massive pressure campaign in Parliament, but you need to back me up on the ground. How many of you are going to write your Liberal NDP members and demand they vote with common sense conservatives to axe the tax? How many will organize protests out of Liberal constituency offices to pressure them to do the right thing? How many of you are going to send emails to all of your networks and post on all of your social media so that every one of your neighbors know about the upcoming April Fool's Day tax hike? How many of you will bombard Liberal NDP offices with phone calls to make sure that they understand their constituents cannot afford to pay anymore?
So the term massive pressure campaign he's used before. Poilievre in November of last year had called for a massive pressure campaign on very similar issues. It was on the carbon tax and specifically trying to remove it from fuels used in agriculture, or at least some agricultural activity. So the idea of him launching and lauding this massive pressure campaign is not new, but pushing people to protest at members of Parliament's offices, their constituency offices, is quite interesting. I was standing beside a relatively senior person on Poilievre's team when he said that, because I did a bit of a double take, and I asked this person, I said, "That's new, right?" And they nodded. And now, conversely, I should point out, I asked one of Poilievre's communications staffers, as is pretty common from journalists when a politician's giving a speech, if I could get a copy of the speech. And they said, "Well, I would, but he's kind of just winging it up there. But we can give you the transcript after." So he wasn't, according to his office anyway, reading from a prepare. I mean, he wasn't reading from anything. There was no teleprompter. He had no script, but he wasn't even going from prepared remarks. So I would assume that that was something that at least he thought of. At least he understood what he was saying. And we've seen MPs' offices bombarded with protests on Israel and Gaza stuff right now. And some of those have gotten quite nasty. Now, to be clear, he's not telling people to do that. Although there is a concern that I think people might raise as to whether you are inviting some sort of a problem when you're asking people, when you're rallying your troops, literally and figuratively, to go and protest MP offices. But at the same time, he's also raising attention to a very important issue right now. There was beside him up on the big screen there, a countdown to April 1st when the carbon tax increase goes into effect. We'll be talking about this in a few moments with our friend Kris Sims. But what was happening there is he's saying, listen, we're staring down this increase. Canadians can't afford it. Affordability and cost of living issues are out of control. This is one thing that the government can very directly control. It's nothing to do with supply chain or inflation or money supply. This is a very explicit, direct thing the government could do, which is say, we are deferring or scrapping the increase to the carbon tax, and they're not doing it. Instead, they're doing this, we're going to, give a little carve out for home heating oil, and we're going to help Atlantic Canadians, but not Western Canadians. And that lovely line that if Western Canadians want to get relief, they should just elect Liberal members of Parliament. Oh, such a heartwarming display of democracy in action. But that has been the Liberal government's line on this. So what Poilievre is doing there is saying he is going to push Liberal and New Democrat MPs to vote for a Conservative motion to scrap this. They added a new slogan last week, to spike the hike. So it's not, you have to spike the hike and axe the tax and then do the hokey pokey. Oh, I know, that's a different one. But you have to spike the hike and axe the tax. Those are the two rhyming schemes that we now have from the Conservatives here. But what's interesting is the House of Commons is practically like not sitting at all. They were off for the Christmas break until January 29th. They returned for 3 weeks, off for a week, on for 1 week, and then off for 2 weeks again. So MPs right now are in their second of 2 break weeks this month. They're only actually sitting for 1 week in March, and that's the week of March 18th. And once the MPs go back, they're only there for a week before they're off again for, I think, 2 weeks. So all of that is to say, if you followed that, basically means that the MPs are only in Ottawa for 1 week in the entire month of March, and then taking 2 weeks off and coming back April 8th. But what I'm pointing out there is that this increase to the carbon tax on April 1st, only 1 week of parliamentary sittings stands between us and that increase. So if anything is going to happen, it's not going to be this week, but it's going to be next week. And the Conservatives are clearly hoping that this pressure they're trying to mount on Liberal and New Democrat MPs will amount to them doing the right thing. Now, I'm not particularly optimistic. We had that one guy from Newfoundland, Ken Hardy, that spoke up and did the right thing at one point, but for the most part, he was kind of they bought his silence by giving that home heating oil exemption for the benefits predominantly Atlantic Canadians. And now all of a sudden, people like Ken Hardy don't care about the effect on the rest of the country. When you had Toronto MPs saying, whoa, 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 what about us? And Western MPs saying, what about us? The Liberals have just said, no, the carbon tax is imperative to the fight against climate change, yada, yada, yada. And Canadians are just expected to spend their money, our money, on this eco-virtue signaling by the Liberals. So we'll talk about that in a couple of moments. I did want to share one more clip from Poilievre's speech because I wouldn't say this was hugely newsworthy, but it was a bit of a departure from his past comments on this. Now, you may have heard previously Pierre Poilievre, and we've talked about it on this show, say that there is going to be a ban if he's elected on his cabinet members going to Davos. He even said at one point that if they go, it will be a one-way ticket because they won't be coming back. Well, he reiterated that pledge, but seemed to extend it a little bit. Take a look.
We're going to bring it home. We're going to bring home our freedom again. We will repeal Liberal censorship law C11. We will ban all of our ministers and members of Parliament from any involvement in the World Economic Forum. There will be no mandatory digital ID, no central bank digital currency. We'll ban the IRGC terrorists to protect our people. We're going to give people back control of their lives here in this country.
So normally when and again, I'm not saying that he has never said it. I have never heard him extend that to all his MPs. I've heard him say cabinet ministers will not be allowed to go to Davos, but he's saying now not only will it extend to members of Parliament in the Conservative caucus as well, but also it isn't just about attending Davos. He says no involvement in the World Economic Forum. That's the pledge that he put forward at the rally yesterday. So I will say, I mean, people online, the TrueAnon types, the Justin Trudeau loyalists, of which there are 4 or 5 left, I think, they're always saying, oh, where's the Conservative platform? Where's the Conservative platform? Well, you listen to when he speaks, he gives a pretty clear indication of what his government's going to do. Just because it isn't in like a nifty PDF with a picture of him on the front cover like Aaron O'Toole on the Men's Health magazine ripoff in 2021, just because it's not in a nice little neatly bound swish book doesn't mean they haven't given a pretty clear indication of what it is they would like to do if they are elected. But the one key issue, and you can tell this wasn't just some general Pierre Poilievre rally. This was a spike I forget the order. I think it was spike the hike, axe the tax, not axe the tax, spike the hike. But it was, the spike the hike, axe the tax rally. So this was an entire rally framed around the abolition of the carbon tax, the deferral or cancellation of the carbon tax increase. So this is clearly an issue. And again, I'm very cynical. I don't believe the Conservatives are going on this limb without having done, at least to some extent, polling on it. But they're clearly confident that this is going to be a winnable issue for them. And, in the last election, I would remind people that the Conservatives ran on their own carbon tax alternative. So inflation was mounting in fall of 2021, not to mention all the COVID issues and whatever, but inflation was absolutely a huge deal, and the carbon tax was exacerbating that. It was straining that even further. So we look at this and generally speaking, saw that Canadians were probably more... They had bigger fish to fry than the carbon tax in 2021. But contrast is still very important here. And in the 2021 election, you had Justin Trudeau saying, we want the carbon tax. We need to increase the carbon tax. We need to keep taxing you until we solve the climate. And then you have the Conservatives saying, okay, we don't like that carbon tax, but how about this other carbon tax? And you'll remember the O'Toole Bucks rewards program, which was where when you buy something that would have a carbon tax, a portion of it is hived off into your own personal low carbon savings account. And then you go and use that personal low carbon savings account when you want to make eco-friendly purchases. So you want to buy a solar panel on your to put on your home, and you then have to go and tap into your account that you would have filled up when you were gassing up your Hummer at Petrocan. That was basically the Aaron O'Toole strategy there. And again, I mean, they tried to say, oh, it's not a tax, but Canadians were like, all right, well, if I'm going to vote for the party that is going to make me pay more on fuel, or the party that's going to make me pay more on fuel, that distinction just doesn't really seem to be there. So that was why I think it was so important. And I think it's probably from that, because remember, Poilievre was a Conservative candidate in 2021. He had to run, at least implicitly, on that platform. He had to run in part on that Conservative plan, which was going to put a carbon tax there. Now, I assure you, I did one interview with Poilievre in the 2021 election, and he was not talking about the carbon tax. He was not exactly proud that this was a part of the Conservative platform. But of course, MPs didn't really want to have a whatever you call it. They didn't want to have a caucus revolt of any kind. But what was fascinating here, and I think really, really fascinating, is that Conservatives, there are not a lot of them, but there are some of them that think that you can just outflank the Liberals on these sorts of issues, that you can just outflank the left. You can be the ones that are going to be the more credible alternative while putting forward a markedly, or remarkably, I'd say, similar policy. And that was kind of what was happening when we looked at that debate in the 2021 election. So Pierre Poilievre, I think it's incredibly, incredibly important to note this is likely looming large on why he is making such a huge deal on this carbon tax. We have Kris Sims joining us, our Monday commentator, the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kris, you've seen, and you and I have been talking about this for weeks now, Canadians are not on board with this. What do you make of this call to action to actually go and protest MP offices that Pierre was giving his supporters yesterday?
I think it's really smart, and it's, spoiler alert, it's something that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has been encouraging now for many years. Old photos of our magazines include us, planting pig-shaped lawn signs on the front of Parliament Hill. So we're all for a peaceful demonstration. In fact, we just finished protesting a couple of months ago in front of Liberal members of Parliament constituency offices in chicken suits. Because, as of course you remember, it was the Atlantic Caucus of the Liberal Party who had the spine, who weren't chickens and who stood up for their constituents, and they got an exemption for the carbon tax on their home heating bills for 3 years. Curious amount of years there to put them past the next election. But it was only for Atlantic Canadians, because they're basically the only ones who use home heating oil. And it was just nothing but crickets. We couldn't hear anything from the rest of the Liberal caucus across the rest of the country. So we think it's a really great idea for Mr. Poilievre to call to action, to email, to phone, to protest peacefully outside of constituency offices, because this is what makes them move, right? Every now and then, I know you've covered this on Parliament Hill yourself, Andrew, everything seems like it's going to stay the same until it suddenly doesn't, right? Everything kind of breaks loose at once. I remember when I was at the CTV Bureau many eons ago, when then Finance Minister Paul Martin hesitated slightly in giving his support out loud verbally for Prime Minister Chrétien during a press conference. And that's all it took. All hell broke loose. And then there was a leadership race and everything kind of fell into place. So this is why we're urging and agreeing that all Canadians who oppose the carbon tax should definitely protest outside of the offices peacefully. Don't give the anti-carbon tax movement a bad name, please. And send in letters and emails. If I can, though, I'd like to tack a little rider to that bill. Okay. Because something else is happening on April 1st, and that is MP pay raises. They're automatically getting a big pay hike. So this means that the Prime Minister, I think, is going to be making over $400,000-ish. A backbench member of Parliament is going to be making around $200,000. And it's a huge pay hike. We're talking thousands of dollars per year. That's also happening April 1st. And that's, of course, people joke and call it April Fools. It's, of course, because it's the start of the fiscal year. That's why all these things change on April 1st. But I will put a bug in Pierre Poilievre's ear. We need some leadership from members of Parliament in the House of Commons to oppose these MP pay hikes. Prime Minister Stephen Harper froze MP pay hikes, and we think it's really important to encourage other MPs, in particular the opposition MPs, to speak out against MP pay hikes right now.
Yeah, I would say that it's very valid. And I want to dig into that and also talk about the Governor General in a moment. But just going back to the carbon tax increase here for a moment, Kris, there was a poll that came out. Now, obviously, polling you have to take with 3,000 grains of salt here. But Main Street poll, 46% support for the Conservatives, 25% Liberal, 15% NDP. MPs are people. It pains me to say that because a lot of the time they don't act like it, but MPs are people. And a lot of them are, despite however partisan and ideological they are, they're very, very concerned about their future right now. And if you're a Liberal member of Parliament in a Toronto riding, let's say, you're in Mississauga, you're in Whitby, you're Newmarket, whatever, like, you know that these numbers are bad news for you. So when you have people that are outside your office saying, hey, we can't afford to live right now, stand up and do the right thing. I do think that some Liberal MPs' insecurity about their seats may actually allow for some action here. That the caveat is that Justin Trudeau has done a very good job in the last 8 years of quelling any dissent.
I think you're bang on there. And it takes years of observation to notice this. And you're right. I can't remember the last time I saw the Conservatives at over 40%. Like you said, polls are polls. There's always give and take, but that is a huge number. And so polls like that make other MPs feel like dinosaurs 65 million years ago, and they've looked in the sky and here comes the asteroid. That's what those feel like. And it ripples through the office on Parliament Hill. People start phoning the constituents saying, hey, is anybody coming in to meet with the MP over the break week? Anything like that happening? That's what gets them really nervous. And to your point, I think that polls like this really matter. And I think it's things like the carbon tax that really matter. So keep in mind that we've got the carbon tax that he's hiking up that, of course, makes our food more expensive because it increases the cost for farmers. It increases the cost for shipping. Just imagine diesel fuel, which is the lifeblood of our economy. It moves everything we eat and use, is now going to have 21 cents per liter tacked onto it. If you take a look underneath a trucker's door, they've got those huge cylindrical tanks. Those things hold more than 1,000 liters. Do the math, times 21 cents. Like, this is a huge cost for people, and it trickles down and ripples down through the rest of the economy. And here we have people, to your point, who are literally saying, we can't afford the basics of life. So energy, heat, shelter, and food. Like, wakey, folks. This is a participation sport, politics, and these MPs are going to have to respond to this. So I think you're right, Andrew. I think that they could break rank on this issue.
Yeah, and when you mentioned 40%, I should just give a bit of context here. Stephen Harper won his majority in 2011, and it was a pretty strong, decisive majority. That was 39.62% of the vote. So that majority was, I mean, yeah, if you round it up, it's at 40, but was less than 40% in absolute votes. So when you have Conservative polling at 46%, we're getting like Brian Mulroney, John Diefenbaker, supermajority territory there, depending on the distribution of it. But you mentioned MP pay raises going up. Governor General also, that quintessential, incredibly important, valuable, relevant figure in Canada. She's getting a raise.
Yes. And I want to be very clear. This isn't about the person. This is about the office. All that being understood. Now, I think I might be alone at the Taxpayers Federation. I don't want to tell tales out of school, but I think I'm one of the only quasi-monarchists among us. And that is only because in the same way that Winston Churchill basically said, democracy, it's ugly, but it's the best system we've got, better than all the others. Very similar here because we have a constitutional monarchy. This is how things work in Canada. I understand, folks, who are monarchists. I understand the role. Okay, the Governor General is His Majesty the King's representative in Canada. In order to pass law, we need this royal literal stamp of approval. But we should not have to be paying through the nose like this. A Governor General literally lives in an all expenses paid mansion. They have a team of housekeepers, drivers, and cooks. The place is just opulent. And now the Governor General, just because they exist, they're getting an $11,000 pay hike this year. again, so this is well over $300,000 now per year that this position is now paid. It's a huge waste of money. This is, yes, it's important legally to get our laws passed, but it's largely ceremonial. This does not require, massive law degrees and a ton of heavy lifting and, wise, sober second thought. And so this is why we're encouraging people to, and I don't know why my camera just went out on you again, Andrew.
I'm blaming Bill C-11. I don't know if we can, but there we go.
I'm not kidding. This only happens on your show and one other. And it ain't on CTV. I'll put it that way. This is so strange.
But the thing, when you mention those quality of life, though, Kris, they're living like monarchs themselves, but they're career bureaucrats and washed-up journalists. I mean, that's the bizarre part, is that, she was a diplomat. I mean, very well decorated. Julie Payette was an astronaut. Michael Jean was a journalist. But, all these people, they're just average, ordinary people that all of a sudden get to live a royal life. That's the part that I find offensive, is that they want to do all the ceremony, and we're paying for it. And look, the issue that the CTF has been quite strong on in this regard is the lifetime of payouts, which often we don't realize. Adrienne Clarkson is still cashing checks worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for all this administrative support. Meanwhile, she's making money as a public speaker for, being a former governor general, but we're still supporting that.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get that gig, you're rolling in it for life, courtesy of the taxpayer. And to your point, we understand this is administrative. Look at the provincial levels. The lieutenants, which occupy the same role, they rubber stamp as well. Mm-hmm. They don't spend a fraction of what it costs.
They don't have official residences in most province. Elizabeth Dowds or whoever it is in Ontario now, just lives where they lived before they were appointed, and that seems to work fine.
Exactly, which gets us, can I shamelessly promote our current campaign?
Go for it.
Gets us to the point of what would you need to be the Governor General? And so we've got these t-shirts. They're at cost. Oh, that's a better one. So that's in front of our Lethbridge, which is the longest trestle train bridge in Canada, which is in North America. In fact, it was on The Last of Us. So if you've seen that weird post-apocalyptic gross zombie movie, and there's that burning bridge that's halfway across, that was in Lethbridge, and they CGI'd it. So all this is to say, we've got this cool thing going on where you can go to our website, taxpayer.com. We're not making money off of it. It's all just at cost. And you can order t-shirts like this. And I would be Governor General for a loonie. So I would skim over, what the Senate...
And I'll even pay the loonie. It won't even go on taxpayer dime there.
For free, really, then. And so
I as soon as I told Sean to get that picture, I was thinking, we probably won't even need the picture. She's probably just going to wear the shirt. But anyway.
Well, I'm glad he grabbed the picture because I had to dig this out. The laundry monster is crazy in this house right now. So, yes. So you can get this one for a loonie. I think Franco says I would do it for a poutine, as they pronounce it out here in Western Canada.
Yeah, but you can't get a poutine for a loonie in this economy.
No, you sure can't. It's largely because of the carbon tax. So we're encouraging people. This is why we're doing this, because you either laugh or cry because of everything being so expensive right now. And this is key. Politicians and hoity-toity bureaucrats hate it when you mock them. They get really upset really fast. And so we should mock them a lot. And so the average Joe and Sally six-pack Canadian should go to our website, find this t-shirt, pick the one they like, take a picture of yourself, post it on the interwebs. And this is our way of sticking a thumb in the eye of the elites and saying, you know what? The Governor General should not be paid this kind of crazy amount of money. And they certainly shouldn't be getting an $11,000 raise just this year.
I'll have to whip out it's a dated reference now, but I have one of the old 2000, it would have been 2008, the Stéphane Dion shrug t-shirts that say, do you think it's easy? Well, you can't see my shrug there. Never mind. But it says, do you think it's easy to make priorities? I've got that on a shirt. I'll have to whip that out, and we'll do novelty political lore t-shirt day on Casual Friday on the Andrew Lawton
Show. Is a puffin involved in that one? I can't remember.
Oh, I can't remember. I have to dig it. It's way at the bottom of the hamper now, because I don't want to, I don't want to actually wear it to, because then it will, lose out the color and the shine. And also I don't want to have to see Stéphane Dion's face every time I look in the mirror. It's bad enough seeing my own face when I look in the mirror. So, all right, Kris Sims, we will see you next Monday.
You betcha.
All right. Thanks for that. Wanted to move from that no natural segue to a more serious note here. We've seen in the last several days and weeks, and to be honest, months, a mounting of anti-Semitism, of incidents of anti-Semitism on city council and politicians' offices and Jewish community centers and schools. And what's happening throughout all of these instances is we've seen the Liberal government in particular be very equivocal on its position. You may remember it was very slow to start talking about a lot of the horrific atrocities that Hamas committed. When it came to protesters calling for a ceasefire, the government didn't say, well, we support Israel's right to defend itself. Justin Trudeau turned around to protesters and says, oh, no, but I am calling for a ceasefire, basically saying, yes, I agree with you, stop protesting. Well, one of the things that is really interesting here is that the government, when it learned that UNRWA, which is the UN refugee agency for the Palestinian territories, had been turning a blind eye to members of its own staff, literally its own staff, assisting Hamas and joining the Hamas attack, they said, all right, we're going to announce a pause, but now they've reinstated it before the next payment was due. So the federal government in Canada has basically not deprived UNRWA of $1 by my count. Lee Crowley is here. He is from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and we're so glad to talk to him as always. Brian, thanks so much for coming on today.
Andrew, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And just before we get underway, I want everybody to see my mug with the Queen's profile on it in the context of your last conversation.
Yeah, Kris said she's a quasi-monarchist. You're not doing the quasi on your part, are you?
I'm the real thing.
All right, duly noted. This was purely window dressing when the government said it was going to pause this funding, and the fact that they've reinstated it just weeks later tells us as much, doesn't it?
Well, it does, Andrew, and let's be even clear about this. What Canada and most other countries have done is who've taken action on this. They've suspended additional funding. They have not cut the basic funding, which is about 1.1 or 1.2 billion dollars. That's the base budget for UNRWA, paid for mostly by Western democracies. I think the United States pays about literally 3/4 of the budget of UNRWA, but there's now because of the conflict, obviously, that's going on between Israel and Hamas, carried out on the territory of Gaza, the people are putting extra money into UNRWA, and it is that extra money which a number of countries promised to suspend while an investigation was carried out about whether we could find credible evidence to support the allegation that there are staff members of UNRWA, as well as family members, associates, and other people close to UNRWA, very much involved in not only the armed conflict since the 7th of October, but in the heinous attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. People, staff members who have actually boasted online and elsewhere about their involvement in this. So, Canada has, first of all, said, okay, we're going to suspend extra payment, not the basic payment, the extra payment.
No, that's fair.
And we're going to suspend it until we have an investigation that tells us whether these allegations are founded. They've now reversed themselves completely. Basically, they've said, oh, well, it doesn't. We're not going to wait for the results of the investigation. We may be funding an organization that aids and abets terrorism, but hey, we got to get that funding in there. And the idea that there is no other way for Canada to provide humanitarian relief to the people of Gaza except through UNRWA is complete nonsense. So I'm not very impressed.
Well, nor should you be. And I should point out, UNRWA itself has even conceded that this allegation was accurate. Now, they've done the whole Casablanca thing of like, we're shocked to find gambling in here, but they've not refuted it at this point. And I want to play and get your reaction to this, Brian. This is a clip from an Israeli official responding to Canada's decision this week. Let's roll that.
A similar question. Canada announced on Friday that funding to UNRWA will be resumed after being paused. Does the PMO have comment on that? And why should Canadian taxpayers and what should they know about the links between UNRWA and Hamas?
So I think what the taxpayers should know is that their money is funding terror. As simple as that. And do they want their money to help terrorists build tunnels, educate children how to kill and that they should kill, and train them how to do so? Is that the best way for the taxpayers' money to be used? We think that there are much better ways. If we want Gaza to have the bright future that it can't, you can't keep on giving the money to an organization that taught hate, facilitated, and was part of a massacre. And it's not just a few. We have evidence of a lot of people, and there's no way that the people who are running this organization did not know this. So that means that there has to be another solution, and the taxpayers' money should be for a better and future for Gaza, which does not include UNRWA in any way.
She is not talking about Iran or Lebanon or Saudi Arabia or Qatar when she's talking about funding terror. She is talking about Canada. And that was a question that was asked by our friends over at the News Forum. Quite a far cry from the relationship Canada had with Israel up until the Liberals took over.
You're absolutely right that the historic relationship that Canada has had with Israel has been a very supportive one. Canada was one of the countries that voted for the creation of Israel in 1948 at the United Nations, in case people have forgotten that the creation of the State of Israel was mandated by the United Nations and carried out by a majority vote of the member states. So the next time somebody tells you that Israel is an illegitimate state, they've got several birth certificates, of which the UN issued one.
I think it was the only pro-Israel vote that ever passed at the UN, to be honest, but it was the important one.
Well, it's the one that matters, I think. Yeah. Canada has been a strong supporter of Israel over many years. And I have to say that I think this decision by the government of Canada to restore the extra funding to UNRWA is entirely in keeping with the behavior of this government over pretty much every foreign policy, national security, national defense issue, which is they're playing to a domestic audience. This is diaspora politics. They're looking to and seeing, tens of thousands of Palestinian and Hamas supporters in the streets and cities of Canada, and looking at the fact that there's now 1 million Muslims in Canada, more, and saying to themselves, there's an electoral calculation here we don't want to be on the wrong side of. And I think that's a shocking and shameful way to conduct the foreign policy of this country.
I would agree. I mean, obviously, politicians, I think, should be beholden to, everything they do should be to serve Canada and Canada's interests. And I think that domestic policy is actually very relevant to foreign policy. But I also believe that fundamental questions of right and wrong are, and those are not majoritarian decisions. And we're talking here about a very clear-cut case about terrorist aggressors assaulting civilians. And we've seen equivocation. And the Liberals, I mean, it used to be historically that the Jewish vote, insofar as it existed, and it was never monolithic, it isn't with any group, but that a lot of the Jewish vote went to the Liberals. And when did that change happen? Because there are a lot of Liberals or lifelong Liberals who are Jewish that I've heard from that don't really have much in the way of high expectations from the Liberals now, but a couple of years ago did. And a couple of years ago kind of would never have expected what's happening now from this party that they've been part of for, in some cases, decades.
Yes, well, I mean, of course, I can't speak to what's going through the mind of members of the Canadian Jewish community. I can tell you what's going through my mind, which is that if I were Jewish and I were looking at the equivocation of the government of Canada, their complete unwillingness to be crystal clear about the fact that Canada as a Western democracy supports the only Western democracy in the Middle East, which is Israel, one that is under the rule of law, that makes its decisions by democratic means, that is entirely legitimate under international law, and is being attacked by people who do not share those values. If I were a Jewish Canadian, I were looking at the government of Canada fumbling the ball over and over again when being asked to confirm that they are going to support Israel and the values that Israel represents in the Middle East. And the government of Canada says, well, maybe until someone makes me uncomfortable politically, and then maybe not. This is completely at odds with the historical behavior of the government of Canada and with, I believe, the values that the government of Canada and Canadians have pursued for generations.
So where do you see it going from here? I mean, the situation domestically has gotten very ugly. I mean, we've just abandoned any pretense that this is about Israel or Zionism when you have Jewish schools and neighborhoods being targeted. We have police that have been, I think, very, very shy about getting involved. And a part of this is because they don't want to be in the middle of some, ethnic turmoil. Basically, or some, cultural spat, and police in general don't want to be the ones in the line of fire when government comes and second guesses whatever decision was made. So where do you see this going? Because I fear, and every Jewish person I've talked to about this says it's going to get a heck of a lot worse.
Yeah, well, I think you really touched on something very important there, Andrew, and that is that I think one of the reasons, not the only reason, I think one of the reasons that police have been so ineffectual, in my view, in protecting the Jewish community in Canada and asserting the right of all Canadians to carry out their ordinary lives free from fear and intimidation. That is what the police are for. That the police have learned that if they do not follow the line that the government wants them to follow, that the government will not be there to support them, and that means that they are quite reluctant, I think, to get into the dirty business, and it will be unpleasant. There is no way to deal with tens of thousands of people in the street shouting hateful slogans, intimidating citizens. This is completely different than the hot tubs of the Freedom Club, I got to tell you, completely different. And many laws are being broken. The laws that police traditionally use to police unruly demonstrations, they're not being pursued. The police are hanging back, and I think one of the main reasons is that they do not think they will be supported by public authorities if they exercise their legitimate authority in these situations. And the people who are paying the price are, of course, the vulnerable members of our Jewish community, who feel completely unprotected and unsupported by the rest of the country. And I don't know how we can do something about this in the absence of public authorities who are willing to take responsibility for what's going on. And I just don't see that right now.
No, you're quite right, Brian. I mean, it's an absolute tinderbox, and I think it's incredibly dangerous and disheartening. And I'm glad people like you are lending your voice to speaking up against it. Brian Lee Crowley, Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I feel you frozen or are deep in thought. So fitting that we have to bring it to an end here. But thank you so much for coming on, sir.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right. We still had your audio at least. Thank you for that, Brian, and we will certainly check in with him as this unfolds. We have to end things there. My thanks to all of you for tuning into the show today. We'll be back in 23 hours and 15 minutes with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.